Hello, today we're going to be going through how to use the AI cost provider template. So when you open the template, you'll notice that there are 5 tabs. We have the disclaimer tab, the cover tab, assumptions, notebook, and benchmarking. Let's start with the cover tab. This explains effectively how to use the template. So we have a few sections. The first is style conventions. So throughout this template, if you notice blue text, that will refer to hard-coded values. So think of this as assumptions, cost for providers. Formulas are in black, unique formulas in red. So this will mean that what is happening in this cell is different perhaps to what was in the cells as its neighbors. Green means it will reference another sheet. So you'll typically see green text in the notebook where we're leveraging some of the assumptions, for example, based on provider costs and model configuration. Finally, if you see a light yellow cell with a blue text, this is one of your input cells. So I've provided base values for all of these in the template. But if you were to customize this yourself, these are going to be the cells that you're editing. So in general, if we speak more about the tabs themselves, you can see here in this description, the cover tab, which is this one and we've spoken about. The assumptions, this is effectively the brains of the template. This is where I have provided initial values and you can update yourself based on providers, based on assumptions regarding costs, conversion rates, etc. And the notebook and benchmarking tab are automatically generated based on what you have in this assumptions tab. The notebook, this is the primary tab of the template you will be using to calculate the costs of using different AI models from different providers. We'll speak about that more when we move to that tab. And finally, the benchmarking tab. So based on your assumptions, I've created a few charts for you to actually benchmark different providers and across different modalities. So comparing costs per tokens and other performance considerations. In terms of how to actually use this template, so first we start by reviewing the disclaimer, and then secondly, you should review and modify any of the assumptions in the assumptions tab. I'll go through how you can go through that process shortly. Finally, and again, like I said, where you'll typically be spending the most of your time is in the notebook tab, which is where you'll use the different calculators for the different modalities and the different providers to estimate the cost of your AI feature. And finally, and an optional one for yourself, look at the benchmarking tab to compare different providers to help you create a more informed decision on which provider you want to use for your specific use case. Okay, so let's move on now to the assumptions tab. And you'll see here we have 6 sections in blue, and we have another 4 sections that are in this darker red. The darker red sections are ones that you do not need to edit and would encourage you not to unless you are trying to make extensions of this template. They are primarily formatting sections so that we can generate the benchmarking tab more easily. The bulk of your time will be in the 6 blue sections. So to edit one of these sections with the assumptions tab, you'll notice on the left-hand side, of your screen, you have these pluses. Just press one and it will open up that section and you can go into it here. So let's start with the miscellaneous section. This is general things for example, when it was last updated, conversion rates, etc. You'll see all of these are labeled and there are typically notes provided as well if I'm using a placeholder value that is potentially not obvious. So for example, a conversion rate for words to tokens, from words to characters, and from characters to token. We have to have these conversion rates because unfortunately there is not a standard approach to pricing across different model providers. So you'll often need to do some conversions to make that in a way that is easy for you to use. And also easy for people to estimate. You don't want to necessarily have to try and think about how many tokens are in your section of text or images. Using words is something that's a lot easier for us to count, and we can use this heuristic here. Exchange rates, so by default, our base currency is US dollar. Most model providers will list their pricing in US dollar. I have some conversion rates here for some other currencies. You can add your own, or you can edit these conversion rates based on what it is at the time that you are using this template. So to make it very obvious how you would edit it is, for example, I have 1.5 here. You could change it, for example, to 1.47, just like that. And the template will update in the notebook for you to use that. Modalities. So these are the core categories that are currently, supported by this template. So we have text, vision, image, speech to text, text to speech, embedding models, and code. We have this here, but I don't actually have the template operating any of these. You could easily extend that for some of the code models. Currently, the only ones that are actually capable of running code, and where I'm saying running code, I mean there is actually a code interpreter associated with it, is via the Assistance API with OpenAI, and you pay per instance of using that code interpreter. So please just refer to their page if you're looking for more information there. This is specifically for OpenAI and how they do their pricing for image understanding models. They have a low and a high quality version. We'll speak about this in more detail in a subsequent section. Okay, now moving on to the provider sections. And each of these sections is very similar in structure. It effectively outlines the models that are provided by each of these providers and their pricing for them. So let's speak through OpenAI first to give you an example, and then I'll just briefly show you the others to highlight how it's similar. So I have pre-filled all of these sections with default values based on when I was last looking at this at their pricing pages for the providers. This includes all of the models, a unit token for them, an input price, an output price, a currency, and any notes. If there is potentially something that you want to highlight here, you can add notes yourself. I have added a few of my own notes in some of the other sections. You have these dropdowns. These dropdowns are used to select what modality is supported by that model. So for example, GPT-4o, we have text. You'll also notice there is another GPT-4o here that has vision. These are the same model, but the same model has different functionalities that it supports. It is a multimodal model, and the different models have different pricing mechanisms, hence the need to duplicate it here. But if you were to extend one of these assumptions or change them, again, it's very simple. All you need to do is just insert a new row. For example, here, you could insert one row below and then type in the name of the model, model B, choose the type of model it is, and fill in the pricing information for it. So very simple to extend. If you want to edit one of the existing ones, again, you can just override these values here. As I mentioned though before, these are the current values as at the time of me last looking at the website. In general, these pricing values do change. So worthwhile checking the pricing page, which is linked at the top of each section for more up-to-date information. Okay, now let's go through the Google one, because this will give you an example of when additional notes have been provided. So like I mentioned before, there is not a standardized approach to the units that are used to calculate prices for AI models across different providers. For the sake of us using a template and trying to be able to compare providers more easily, we want to do as close to an apples to apples approach as we can. So I've converted, for example, all text to using units of millions of tokens. For providers that don't necessarily specify their pricing values in millions of tokens, we need to do some conversions. So I've gone with an example here. You can see the formula up the top, and you see notes here on how I've done that conversion. These are not necessarily going to be the exact value that you see when you actually run these models, because there are some, roundings made here. But in general, it's a good starting point, and it will be close, but you're welcome to change your formula for how you calculate this pricing. Okay, and as you can see, all of these sections follow the same information. So, for example, there's the Amazon version as a pricing page. As a note on AWS, as a model provider, the pricing actually differs based on the region that you are deploying in. So it's important for you to check the actual specific region. Firstly, that the model is available, and secondly, what it's priced at in that region. I've written assumptions here where necessary. Anthropic, the same here, and TogetherAI. TogetherAI is actually, it's priced differently to the other providers in the above sections, in the sense that you don't actually have a price per each model. The pricing is based on the model parameter size. So for example, text-based 4 billion would suggest a 4 billion and under parameter model, and the numbers at the end here are the same. This should correspond though to what you see on the actual pricing page if you're looking to cross-reference these and to update these values. So in general now, we have all of these sections where your assumptions lay. As I mentioned, I've filled in prices for you. You can edit them yourself. You can make customizations. You can add more sections. You could add another provider. You could edit an existing provider. To quickly show you these sections which don't need to be edited, they are, as I mentioned before, literally just formatting of the above assumption sections so that we can more easily ingest this data into graphs for the benchmarking. So these are all formulas that you don't need to edit. Okay, let's move to the Notebook tab next. The Notebook tab, we now have 6 sections which correspond to the modalities from your Assumptions tab. So for each of these sections, we have a templated calculator for you to determine the price of using an AI feature that leverages that modality. Each section is laid out quite similarly. To expand a section, again, make the use of the pluses on the left-hand side, and you can collapse them the same by clicking the minus once that generates. So let's start with text generation, because most people deploying features at the moment are using text generation primarily. Start with an overview and instruction reminder here of how to use it. I will speak through how to do that now though. So each section starts off with a configuration subsection. In here, you can choose from the dropdown which model you plan to use. This is all the text models from your assumptions page will pre-populate here in this dropdown. So for this case, let's, for example, choose GPT-4o. It will then automatically pull in the provider name and the price calculated per. So this is using the units here. And now you can provide assumptions on input and output words. So let's, for example, change it to 60, and we'll change this to 120. Okay, now we have subsections for a detailed breakdown of the calculation, as well as summaries. So let's, for example, just look at the summary. This would tell you straight away how much it would be to use a single instance with the above assumptions. So assuming you're having 60 input words and are generating 120 output, your total price in USD is this value here, breaking down by input and output, and you have a visualization just to the right of the split between those. You can convert it to your local currency. So choosing a dropdown, again, this is populated based on the Assumptions tab. So Great British Pound, for example, and then the pricing will update based on the conversion rate that has populated. As you'll notice, of course, the breakdown between input, output, and total price remains the same because the conversion is constantly applied to both input and output. Let's now look at the calculation section, which gives you more detail. So at the top, we'll step out any unique modifiers that have been done. So what we're trying to do effectively is to break this down into a price per input effectively. And this is how we do this process here. So we calculate the number of input tokens. This is using the assumptions from up above, your input words, as well as using the unit modifier, which in this case is changing it from words to tokens. We then have our price per token. This is here. A lot of the time, this is going to be a very small number. You can increase the number of decimal places visible to make this more easily seen. And then finally here, the input price is just the tokens multiplied by the unit price per token. Output has a very similar approach. So this is your basic bread and butter template for calculating the price of using a text generation model. To show how this updates for different providers, let's look, for example, if we were to change to Text Bison, the base, you now see the provider is Google. Use the same assumption for input and output words, the costing change, and we get a different value and a different breakdown for the cost. Again, because we are doing this on a per use basis, the total price for a lot of these, especially text-based models now, is very cheap. So expand decimal places if you want to more easily compare. Another extension that you could provide to this template is, again, this is just assuming it's a single use case and this is your price per unit. You could easily modify this so that you can determine, let's say I'm doing a batch of 100 of these, and you could multiply these total prices by 100 to get the batch value. Okay, so let's minimize this section now, and let's look into image understanding and how that works. Okay, again, we have our overview and instructions at the top and our configuration section. Let's move to an OpenAI model to start, so GPT-4o. And we have a few more configuration details that you can provide here. So we have an image width and we have an image height that you can provide. This would be a very large image. This is in pixels, but I've used this large image to demonstrate the calculation. In general, you can provide any values here and you'll get the output, as well as how many image that you are looking to generate. And again, as the note here says, we're assuming that all images that you provide are of the same dimension. If you want to test different dimensions, change this to 1, and then each time update the image width and height. Okay, so we have a few sections here in our detailed calculations. Most notably, you'll see there is now a section for OpenAI and a section for generic. This is the case because OpenAI leverages a more complicated calculation technique for their image understanding models, as opposed to some other providers, which, for example, will give you a price just per image. So in general, if you're using OpenAI and you want to see a breakdown of how it's done, open the OpenAI section. Otherwise, open the generic section. You'll get a note here that if you do open the generic section and you're using OpenAI, that it's not valid. So you'll be reminded of that there. Let's break down firstly the cost summaries. As you'll see, it's the same. You have the number of images, which comes from here. So if I change this to 3, you'll see this updates to 3. The price per image, and then a total price, which is just the multiplication of the two, and your local currency conversion mechanism again. Okay, let's break down now the OpenAI calculation method for image understanding. This is detailed further on their website, but I find actually seeing it broken down can make it a bit easier to understand than having to just read it all through text. Firstly, we have the quality modifier, which can be low or high. Again, this comes from your assumptions and this is directly from them. If we're doing low quality, then we don't do any of this retiling, which you'll see from the note here. If we are doing high quality, then we will be doing the tiling. So let's start with high quality so we can talk through the tiling process. OpenAI calculates the number of tokens that you use for the image based on a tiling mechanism. Once we have these tiles, then we can easily convert it to tokens based on their quoted modifiers. Let's work through how this is actually done though. So we start with an image dimension, a width and a height, and then we calculate an initial modifier. The purpose of this initial modifier is to make it so that the largest size is 2048 pixels in length. So in this case, because the width is the largest size, we're downsizing the width to be 2048. So this is the modifier required to do that conversion. We then step out our initial resize width and initial resize height, which is just by applying the modifier to the assumptions that you provided in the configuration section. So as you can see here, confirming the resize width is 20 by 2048, and the resize height, applying the same logic, is 137.8 pixels. We then need to calculate a final modifier. So OpenAI does a further modification step after this initial resize, which is to make it so that the shortest size is less than or equal to 768 pixels. So we have to calculate a modifier for that. In this case, we don't need to do this modifier because the initial resized height is already shorter than 768 pixels. So we have our final resize width and we have our final resized height here. We then need to determine how many of these 512 by 512 tiles the image will require, because these tiles, like I mentioned before, is how the cost is actually calculated. So we can do this quite easily by just finding out the number of tiles that we would need to fit the width and the number of tiles that we would need to fit the height. We then can use this information to calculate the total number of tiles required. Once we have these tiles required, we can then determine the number of tokens that are needed. So All of them, regardless of whether it's low or high quality, will have a base token count of 85. And if I just show you for the low variant here, you can see we don't add any additional tokens. If we change it to high, then we need to add the additional tokens, which is based on the tiles. And you can see here the formula that is used for the number of tiles. This includes the hard-coded value in the formula here, which is something that has been quoted by OpenAI directly. So that is our conversion from tiles to tokens. This may change over time if OpenAI changes their prices, so look out for this one. Finally, we get our total tokens, which is just the sum of the base and additional tokens. We then can get our unit price, which is just the number of tokens times the price per tokens. And let's align this right as well. And you can now see the final output as well. We have the number of images that we want, and we have the unit price, which is effectively just breaking it down per image. Okay, we can then see so we don't need this generic section, we can then see our cost summary, and this becomes more obvious now, how we're changing it by 5 times 0.038 to get the value. Okay, now let's look at the variant where we are using a provider that is not OpenAI. So for example, Google. This calculation is now no longer valid, so we can minimize this. And the generic section is now the valid section. So very simple to calculate in this version, a lot nicer to calculate. It effectively is just a value of a price per image multiplied by the number of images, which gives you a total price. You can see the cost summary follows this same calculation here. So that's a breakdown of how to calculate pricing for the for image understanding. Okay, image generation is the next section. Image generation is models like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney. Google has their own variants as well. These are models that, given a text input, will generate an image. In some cases, it's not just text input, but for the sake of this assumption, it's easier to assume that. So again, overview, model selection. This takes all of the image generation models that are supported. We have our detailed calculations again. In this case, the detailed calculations are basically equivalent to the cost summaries because it is just the number of images that you're looking to generate multiplied by a price per image. So you'll see we have variations here as well for the base version and the like the extra resolutions, the version of the model based on its output quality is specified as its own unique model. That's why there is no modifier here for the quality. We have a different model for each one, which makes it very simple because then you can just have the price per each model and do the calculation based on that. Okay, speech to text is the next section. And this is different in that we're now introducing a new unit effectively, which is minutes here. And we do our calculations this time based on the total number of seconds that you are transcribing or translating. And then the calculation becomes very simple. So just the number of seconds that we have here, and then calculated as a multiplication with the price per second to get the total price. So the only input that you need to provide here is just the number of minutes that you're looking to generate speech to text for. So for example, if it's 3 minutes, it's down to this value here. Cost summary and local summary are the same. Local currency summary are the same modifiers. Text to speech. This is the reverse of speech to text in that we are providing text to the model and we're asking it to generate speech. This can often be, for example, used if you're trying to do voiceover for a specific feature, or if you're trying to build a voice agent to assist with customer support or other tasks. You have your models. We only have 2 that we can choose from here. These are the OpenAI provided models. You have the number of words that you're looking to generate audio for. We have a modifier that will turn this into a number of characters, and then you'll get a price per character and you will get a total price. This again is all taken from your assumptions, and if you're ever looking to see which specific assumption it comes from, if you go to the formula bar, you will see there which one it comes from. Finally, moving on to embeddings next. Though the process is the same, select your model. We have the number of tokens that we're looking to generate, and we have our detailed calculations. We have a price per unit modifier, the unit modifier, and then we get our calculation as the number of units multiplied by the price per unit. If we're using different models, it will all update automatically for you as well. So this is quite a simple way to streamline comparing the different providers. Also, you can choose the number of words that you're looking for, and you can choose the embedding model, which may be from the same provider or it may be from different providers, and you can get the different outputs. Okay, moving on now to the benchmarking tab. So this will generate automatically, like I mentioned, based on your assumptions. And for each of the modality sections, we have some charts based on the cost per each of the feature. So feel free to scroll through these on your own time. You can use them in your decision making for comparing providers and comparing benchmarks. There are a lot of good websites as well that will do comparisons on latency. Cost obviously is only one portion of the problem that you're trying to solve when you're evaluating which provider to use. You also need to understand cost and performance. So you should, I guess, caveat this pricing template with work that you do to understand the latency, the performance implications of different providers and their different models. So yeah, as you can see, a lot of helpful information generated automatically for you. Okay, so that is an overview of how to use the template. I hope you find it useful. Again, as I mentioned at the start, I've pre-filled values with you based on the current quoted prices from these providers. You can change these, you can extend it, and hopefully it will help you to make more informed decisions when determining what provider you want to use for your AI feature. If you have any questions, please feel free to shoot us an email at info@aregoai.com, and thank you very much.